Winding Down by me, Lisa J. Rivers. Chapter 1, January. It looks like you're planning to murder someone. I looked blankly at the cashier, confused by what he meant. Rope, duct tape, Stanley knife, he remarked, indicating to the items ready to be scanned. Yes, indeed I had rope, duct tape, a tumble-dry filter, Stanley knife and a garden hose. I scrambled for a response, but I was taking too long. Was I looking too guilty? Should I give him an explanation that was less likely to be murder? The rope is to tow my car, I responded vaguely. The hose is for my garden, the rest is for my tumble dryer. Was that too explanatory? His response would answer that question for me. Surely one of those bungee ropes with the hooks on would be more suitable, as the rope could snap, he suggested. No, that wouldn't be any good at all. How was I meant to kill myself with a bungee rope? Was I that overweight that he actually thought I could snap a rope? Well, I guess I was twice the weight and size that I should be, but ropes were designed to withstand my weight and a lot more. Huh? I replied in my confused state. For towing the car. The rope might snap. The car. Of course he meant the car. He didn't know my suicide plans. Idiot. Oh, yes, but I couldn't find the right bungee thingy, I responded once I gathered my thoughts. I can get someone to have a look for you if you like. He sure was helpful, but I knew the rope would be just fine. I shook my head, glanced around the checkout area, and picked up some individually wrapped chocolate hearts, as I saw there were 3 for £1. That's not bad, I thought. I can eat them on the way home. There, at least the victim will be fed, I snorted sarcastically, teasing the cashier and smiling a little. No one ever complained about my sense of humour, well, apart from those that didn't understand it, or those that thought it inappropriate at funerals. I tended to attempt to lighten the mood when in an awkward situation with a little humour, but it wasn't always my thought through first. Like at Tom's father's funeral last month, it wasn't really seen in good taste to respond to Tom's comment while putting the order of service in his inside jacket pocket. But he thought he'd never be able to fit his father in his pocket, with "in a few weeks you'll be able to fit him in your ashtray." I felt the burn of the irons in the room glaring at me in disgust. It was his dad's death that had been the nail in the coffin for our marriage. Tom was sobbing constantly, angry with the world, and I spent all of our time together attempting to console him, whilst not having a clue how he must be feeling. I'd never really known my own father, as he left when I was just a baby and had severed all ties. There were no memories of fun times together, only hateful, bitter comments from my mother during childhood, and indeed this trickled into adulthood too. It was the opposite from Tom. He idolised his father in such a way that he even smoked the same brand of cigarettes, followed the same career path, and even insisted we name our daughter Alexandra after him. Ah, I see. It's all for Valentine's Day, the cashier said as he gave me an over-exaggerated wink. Say no more. I was suddenly brought back to my present situation. My mind had wandered and I was now fighting back the tears. I mumbled something incoherent, paid the cashier and gathered my purchased goods. It was a busy day, the first Sunday in January, and home improvements were everyone's New Year's resolutions, it seemed. My New Year's resolutions this year were a little bit different to the usual diet and exercise pledges that we women usually sign up to. Following a horrendous few weeks of arguments, storming out, sleeping in separate beds, crying, apologising, blame, guilt, regret, I think we've gone through every stage of grief in the space of 6 weeks. AJ, as I prefer to call Alexandra, had decided it may be easier to have Christmas away from home this year. This had stunned me, as I'd never had a Christmas away from my only child. Never really had more than a school or work day away from her. Tom had become even more hateful than usual, not restraining his acidic comments and telling me exactly what he thought of me. Yes, he agreed that I was overweight and could do with losing a few stone. His mission this year was to ensure I lost at least 5 stone through diet and exercise. Exercise was near impossible for me due to my chronic illness, which didn't exist according to Tom, but that's a whole new story. And food was my only solace at times, which didn't help my weight issues. However, my resolutions were different this year, as my aim was to get everything in order. Winding down every issue of my life, my failing business as well, as Tom called it, a hobbyist. My family that already held me at arm's length, my friends who were now in single figures. Tom had ensured that all I had left was our daughter and himself. He had made me half the woman of my former self, ground me down over the years. I had tried to stand up to him but failed. I had failed at every aspect of my life. Now it was time for this life to end. Through eyes blurred by the tears that I was trying to hold back, I walked back to the bus stop. Simple tasks such as this were difficult, but I fought through the pain, a woman on a mission. Finally out of the car park, I could see the bus stop across the road. Everywhere was a blur like tunnel vision. All I wanted to do was get back home and hide my purchases before Tom found them. My thoughts were suddenly jarred by a loud horn sounding. I looked to my right and saw a car heading towards me. I quickly stepped back onto the curb to move out of the car's way and stood motionless as the driver wound the passenger side window of his car and shouted at me. I wasn't really listening to what he was saying, as it was something I got used to over the years. Stupid woman was a phrase I'd heard one too many times, and yes, I was stupid. I had missed my first opportunity to complete my final mission. If I'd just stayed there a few seconds longer, it could have been game over. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes. There were plenty of cars coming, so I could give it another go, a better effort. I looked around. People were looking at me and shaking their heads. I shut my eyes again. The sound of the beeping that indicated the crossing nearby was safe made me open my eyes again. I saw the bus coming, so quickly dashed to the crossing, ran across the road and towards the bus. Oh, on the bus, I fumbled with my bag to get the return ticket out of my purse. I sat down, panting breathlessly, my legs throbbing from the pain of the dash. During the journey, I kept my eyes closed for the majority of the time, trying to control my breathing, ignore this pain. The pain and the breathlessness were making me feel nauseous, and I really didn't need to throw up in front of a bus full of passengers. When I eventually opened them again, I realised that it was nearly my stop, so I stood up, grabbed my bag and rang the bell. I held on tightly as the bus jolted to a halt. I made my way to the door, down the steps and onto the curb, being careful not to stumble. I'd had more than enough humiliation for one day. I slowly limped away from the bus stop and along the road towards our street. As I turned into our cul-de-sac, a ginger cat approached me and rubbed against my legs. I stopped and gave it some fuss. Tom didn't like cats, so we never had one, but I loved them so much that I could never resist their charms. It purred as I stroked it, and it jumped up so I could reach its head. It was like it could sense that my legs hurt too much to crouch down as it jumped up onto the wall for more cuddles. My legs soon started to throb again and the nausea reared its ugly head again, so I said goodbye to my furry little friend and completed my journey home. Once home, I opened the garage door and looked inside. It was a mess, as Tom never really bothered with it except to store unwanted items, so I knew there would be plenty of spaces to hide my bag. The garage smelled musty and dirty, so I didn't want to spend too much time in there. I quickly grabbed a packet of paracetamol from my secret stash in a small yellow box on a shelf behind a plastic bag full of plastic bags. I shoved them into my handbag, stepped over several boxes of old ornaments, a stepladder and a box of tools, and closed the door again. I fumbled with my keys and let myself into the house, stepped over the variety of leaflets below the letterbox and walked straight to the living room. I lay on the sofa and closed my eyes, reflecting on the day so far. I'd been so close to ending everything by accidentally walking in front of a car. Why was I so close to the car hitting me, yet I still jumped back? Damn my basic survival instincts. Why had I used the crossing to get to the DIY store and back to the bus stop? If I wanted to die so badly, I could have at least taken the risk of crossing at the road. I had trained myself to use crossings as I could barely dash across any roads with how slow I was. The pains in my legs were a constant reminder of how I was unable to run anywhere. Running across the road at the crossing had been the main cause of the pain this time, although walking to and from bus stops and the trek around the DIY store had contributed to this also. As I run across the road at the crossing, I must have looked like a demented hippo. My boobs swinging and crashing against each other, my jeans falling down as my streaky stretch mark ridden belly popped over the waistband, my t-shirt riding up over said belly. How much can one woman humiliate herself in the space of a minute? Juggling a handbag and a shopping bag while holding one arm over my wobbly bosom and the other hand holding my trousers up while attempting to cover my enormous tummy must have been quite a sight. I wanted to laugh at myself, but instead my bottom lip wobbled like my tummy had done earlier, and tears welled in my eyes. I grappled in my bag and grabbed tissues for the eyes, some painkillers and a half-empty bottle of water for my legs. I sat up, my head spinning, and popped out 2 tablets from the packet. I opened the bottle of water and placed the lid on the arm of the sofa. I stared at the paracetamol in my hand. I had been unable to swallow pills until recently. Tom had refused to buy me soluble aspirin anymore, saying that aspirin wasn't good for me, and implying that if I was in that much pain, I would swallow the goddamn pills. In the past, I bought soluble paracetamol, but the taste was vile. I bought children's liquid paracetamol, which was a sickly strawberry flavour, but it seemed to disappear as quickly as I bought it lately. I suspected that it was Tom who was disposing of these and replacing with capsules. So to return the favour, I was stashing a box at a time of these in the garage for a special occasion. I'd not managed to do a web search to find out how many paracetamol I needed for a successful suicide, as Tom would check the search history on the computer, but had about 40 so far. The paracetamol was still in my hand. "Stop stalling, Sam," I muttered. I found that the best technique for me was the tablet first, placed gently on the back of the tongue, followed by a glag of water. A glag was slightly more than a sip, but less than a swig. It usually took a few attempts and a lot of coughing and spluttering. This time was no different. Tablet on the tongue, grab the bottle, glag of water, hold it in my mouth for what seemed like an eternity, managed to swallow the water but not the tablet, spit the tablet out and start again. I was grateful that Tom had agreed to switch from the caplets, which melted on the tongue between attempts and tasted vile, to capsules, which I was slowly getting used to. At first it felt like I was attempting to swallow a pen lid, and instincts dictate that one must not swallow a pen lid due to risk of death. I'd heard a news report once where a child had choked to death after swallowing a pen lid, which is why they now had holes in the end. But capsules didn't have a hole in one end. I'd seen a child choke on a boiled sweet in a school playground once when AJ was little, and the kid, and the mum and me in fact, were very lucky there was a nurse around, as it involved a little girl being tipped upside down, slammed in between the shoulders and puking. She did survive, however, as did I, despite the shock of seeing a kid almost die and then puke. I am one of those unfortunate people who would never be able to help in a crisis, as I just tend to pass out. As for vomit, this was one of my top phobias. After several attempts, I managed to consume both capsules, and then I lay back down on the sofa and closed my eyes. "I guess we aren't having dinner today, then." His deep, angry voice jolted me out of my slumber, as I must have dozed off. My eyes shot open, stunned, and I slowly sat up. I still ached all over, especially my legs. My head was spinning, and I still felt quite queasy. "I don't feel well, Tom," I replied, laying back down. "Of course you don't," he replied sarcastically, sighed and stormed into the kitchen, slamming around in the cupboards, fridge, freezer and cooker. I was woken again by his shifting my feet out of the way as he sat down next to me with his dinner, a pizza. The smell of the pepperoni on it made me feel even worse than before, but I could feel my stomach starting to turn. I couldn't be sick. I hated sick. I had a fear of it, in fact. I kept swallowing, as I could feel excess saliva in my throat and mouth. This wasn't a good sign. I shut my eyes and tried to think of good things. I could feel the panic rising, my stomach churning, and could hear him crunching his pizza. I was sweating profusely, but I just kept swallowing and breathing deeply. I remembered the cat I had seen earlier in the street, and this seemed to calm me down a bit, and soon the sickness died down. I stayed there still for a bit longer, just to ensure that it wasn't going to return, and yes, my stomach had settled. "Go to bed, will you?" I was again jolted from my sleep by my husband's gruff voice. "What time is it?" I questioned, attempting to keep my eyes open. "It's 10, he replied abruptly. "There's no point in you being down here if you're just going to sleep." "No, it's fine. I'll wake up now and we can watch a film together if you like." He looked at me, snorted and raised his eyebrows. "Yes, that'll work, because you never fall asleep watching films, do you?" he replied sarcastically, his voice stern. Yes, it was true. I did have a reputation of nodding off while watching TV, especially films. I could watch the same film many times and still not remember the storyline. Sometimes I could not even recall watching a film at all, which would cause additional arguments, as Tom didn't like to watch the same film twice. Just go to bed, he repeated, his face scrunched up like it had a nasty taste in his mouth or smell up his nose. I nodded and sat up slowly. He was watching me the whole time. The expression on his face remained unchanged. I stood up, supported myself on the sofa arm, and headed out of the living room towards the stairs. I turned around to look at Tom, who was still looking at me. "Night," I said, and smiled at him. "Yep," he replied, and looked away.